All right, buckle up because today we are diving into some seriously heavy stuff with Nietzsche's on the genealogy of morals.
Yeah, this is not light reading, is it?
Definitely not. I mean,
Okay.
this guy, he was a total philosophical rock star, just shaking things up.
Oh, totally.
And this book, published in 1887.
1887.
Yeah,
What?
it was basically a giant philosophical grenade thrown right at conventional morality.
It's true. He really went there. And what's so wild is how relevant it still feels today. I mean, he's tackling these huge questions like, where do our ideas of good and bad even come from?
Right, it's like philosophy 101.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
Nietzsche, he's like, nope, we're going deeper, way deeper. So give it to me straight. What kind of radical answers are we talking about here?
Okay, so just imagine this. Nietzsche, he goes all the way back, digging into the history of the word good itself.
No way, really.
Oh, yeah. And get this, he suggests it might actually be linked to the Goths.
The Goths, like the ancient warriors.
Yep, those guys
Yeah.
known for, conquering and generally being a dominant force.
So not exactly known for their empathy and kindness.
Not really. And that's Nietzsche's point. It's like he's saying our entire language of morality, it might be rooted in these power struggles throughout history.
Whoa. Okay, so hold on. You're saying that our understanding of good from the very beginning, it could be biased.
It's possible. Like, imagine a victor writing history, making themselves look good.
Right. It's all about who's telling the story.
Exactly. And Nietzsche, he takes it even further. He compares these noble warriors of the past, often seen as, the good guys,
Right.
to birds of prey.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
He's saying these figures, they were strong, they were dominant, they took what they wanted.
Not exactly the image of a saint, are they?
Not quite. But he's saying that what they were doing, it wasn't necessarily evil, but it was definitely about power.
Survival of the fittest kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's where bad comes into play.
Yeah.
Nietzsche suggests that what we call bad might have originally been a way for weaker groups to demonize the strong.
Okay, so like a way to protect themselves.
Exactly. Because
Yeah.
those strong people, they were a threat, right?
Yeah.
So these weaker groups, they needed a way to band together, and morality offered a pretty good cover.
So it's less about some universal truth and more about like social strategy.
It's a power dynamic playing out over centuries.
Okay, so we've gone from powerful tribes shaping our ideas of good and bad to basically like forming societies in response to these power dynamics.
Right. So where does this idea of a bad conscience fit into all of this?
That's where things get really interesting. We're going to get into Nietzsche's more, shall we say, psychological ideas.
Oh, even better. Lay it on me.
All right, so he argues that this bad conscience, this feeling of guilt, the voice in your head saying you did something wrong,
Oh, yeah, I know that voice well.
it emerges as we transition from a more primal, instinctual way of life to a more civilized, rule-based society.
So basically, as we become more civilized, this guilt develops.
Exactly. And to describe this transition, he makes this really striking comparison. He compares it to dot branding.
Branding.
Mm.
Like with a hot iron.
Yeah, it's a powerful image, right? And Nietzsche, he's being very intentional with it. Think about it, branding. It involves inflicting pain to make a lasting mark. It's about forcing someone to remember.
I'm starting to see where this is going.
Right.
So you're saying he thinks early societies, they used pain and punishment almost like that branding iron.
Exactly. They wanted to create a more obedient population, a more civilized population.
So civilization, at least according to Nietzsche, was built on some pretty messed up foundations.
Right. It's like, is it really civilization if it requires that kind of force?
That's quite a question to grapple with, and definitely not what I expected when we started talking about morality.
Well, with Nietzsche, to expect the unexpected,
Yeah.
he really forces us to re-examine everything, doesn't he?
Well, we're essentially talking about a kind of societal domestication process, but instead of taming wild animals, we're taming ourselves. And that's where this bad conscience comes in.
Precisely. Nietzsche argues that those primal instincts, those urges for power and self-expression, didn't just vanish when we entered into society. They were suppressed, driven inwards. He uses this incredibly evocative phrase, man's internalization, to describe it.
It's like we traded the dangers of the wild for this whole new internal battlefield. No wonder we feel conflicted sometimes.
Exactly. We become these pressure cookers of unspent primal energy, and that, Nietzsche suggests, is the breeding ground for guilt, self-doubt, and all the fun stuff that comes with having a bad conscience. But what's fascinating is where he takes this idea next, because now he introduces the concept of the ascetic ideal, and things get really interesting.
The ascetic ideal. Okay, you're going to have to break that one down for me. That sounds like something out of a history book.
Imagine those figures who dedicate their lives to self-denial. Priests, monks, certain philosophers. They renounce worldly pleasures, wealth, even basic comforts, all in pursuit of a higher spiritual truth. That's the ascetic ideal in a nutshell.
Okay, I get it. They basically give up everything earthly to get closer to some kind of ultimate truth or meaning. But how does that tie into everything else we've been talking about, like power and morality? It almost seems like the opposite.
That's where Nietzsche throws another curveball. He suggests that even this seemingly selfless pursuit of truth, this renunciation of worldly power, might actually be another form of power itself, just a more subtle and insidious one.
Wait, what? How can giving everything up be a power play? That doesn't make sense.
Think about it this way. By denying their earthly desires, ascetics gain a reputation for wisdom and spiritual insight. They become figures of authority, offering interpretations of suffering, promising meaning in a world that often feels meaningless. They hold a certain power over those who are still grappling with those very desires.
So it's like they're saying, hey, I've conquered myself. I've seen through the illusions of this world, so listen to me. It's a power grab disguised as humility.
Exactly. And Nietzsche was very wary of this kind of power dynamic. He saw it happening in his own time, particularly within religious institutions, but also in the realm of philosophy. He was deeply suspicious of anyone who claimed to have a monopoly on truth, who used their supposed enlightenment as a way to control others.
That's a really good point. It's like they're trading physical comforts and earthly power for something even bigger, spiritual authority and influence over people's minds and beliefs. It's kind of brilliant when you think about it, but also kind of terrifying, you know? It's kind of crazy. But this whole ascetic ideal thing,
Yeah,
it's not just some ancient history lesson, right?
right.
It feels oddly relevant to today's world, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about it. Wellness gurus, self-help books.
Yeah.
Those social media influencers always peddling some version of enlightenment.
Right. It's like Nietzsche saw it coming.
Totally. He was way ahead of his time.
He really was.
Yeah.
Because he understood that even the pursuit of truth, even with good intentions.
Right. Even with the best intentions, can become a way to try and, control others. And he was really critical of people who used that supposed enlightenment to shame others or manipulate them.
It's like that saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Exactly.
But in this case, it's not about money or political power, right?
No.
It's about controlling the narrative,
Yeah.
deciding what counts as good
Yeah.
or truthful.
It's like a new kind of currency.
It really is.
Instead of gold or land, it's this, moral superiority, this claim to some higher truth.
Which gives you influence.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in a world, think about it, with so much information out there, everyone wants attention, wants to be validated.
Everyone wants to be right.
Exactly. And that kind of currency, that moral superiority, it's powerful.
Super powerful. So it's like Nietzsche is, he's holding up a mirror.
Yeah. Forcing us to confront this uncomfortable possibility that our own pursuit of knowledge, our desire to be better,
Yeah.
it might not be totally pure.
That's the thing about Nietzsche.
Right.
He doesn't give you easy answers,
No.
no comforting platitudes. He makes you face these really complex questions about what motivates people, about how power, it sneaks in, even to our seemingly noblest aspirations.
So where do we go from here? If good and bad are shaped by power struggles, even the pursuit of truth can be a power play. What are we supposed to do with all of this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Nietzsche, he doesn't give you like a rule book. He doesn't say, here's the new morality.
Yeah.
But what he does give you, and it's maybe more valuable, are tools to think critically about your own values, to really look at the narratives, the ones we've inherited about good and bad, and decide for yourself.
So it's not about finding a perfect moral code.
No.
It's about self-awareness
Yes.
and critical thinking.
Yes. Taking responsibility for what you believe instead of just blindly accepting what you've been told.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. Recognize how power, and it can be really sneaky, impacts how we understand the world.
It can be so subtle.
And then the courage to challenge it, question everything, even the stuff that seems totally untouchable.
This has been a trip. Nietzsche, man, he really throws down the gauntlet. We could talk about this for hours.
Oh, easily. He's one of those thinkers you can just keep coming back to, finding new layers.
Absolutely. But, okay, if our listener walks away from this deep dive with just one thing, what should it be?
Don't be afraid to question. Don't be afraid to think for yourself. Challenge your own assumptions. Because Nietzsche's right. The unexamined life is not worth living.
And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with this. If our values are shaped by forces outside of our control, as Nietzsche suggests, is it possible to create a morality that goes beyond those forces?
Hmm.
Something deeper, more authentic, something more humane, something to think about. Big thanks to you for joining me on this deep dive. This has really been a thought-provoking conversation.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
And to our listeners, keep those minds churning, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.